Good evening, a very warm welcome to Business at 9 here on ET Now. I'm Vikram Oza. A day after that row erupted over the YouTuber, the influencer and podcaster Ranveer Allahbadia's crude and crass remarks at a comedy show, the issue has been raised in the Lok Sabha and was done by the Shiv Sena Member of Parliament Naresh Bhaske. The Member of Parliament has demanded that the central government should pay attention to the content on OTT platforms and podcasts and that there should be a censor on the platforms. He also demanded that a case should be filed and action should be taken against such YouTubers and podcasters. Of course, the YouTuber apologized for his comments after coming under fire from all quarters for his remarks that were termed vulgar and unacceptable by social media users. But a complaint has been filed against both Allahbadia and Samay Raina over the comments that were made on the show. So let's break down the subject at hand, which is about freedom of speech for the most part. At this time, when a politician stands up in Parliament and says there should be strictures, there should be censorship, it brings up very important subjects that are dear to us as a democracy. Madhavan Narayanan is a senior journalist. He joins us along with senior advocate at the Supreme Court, N.S. Napinai. Great to have you both with us. Ms. Napinai, we've seen around the world, regulation often comes under the guise of either protecting cultural values or preventing misinformation. But now the question is, where do we draw the line, if at all that line needs to be drawn, between necessary regulation and state overreach? How tough is it to draw that line?
You know, when we speak about it, it sounds very easy because the line clearly falls between protection and protectionism, right? So that's where the overreach invariably happens. So we have to understand that, as you rightly said, we are a democracy and our constitution clearly states that if you are going to lay down any restrictions on free speech or expression, it has to be reasonable restrictions. And it doesn't just leave it open-ended on that. It also lays down what are all the parameters on which you can lay down those reasonable restrictions also. So merely reproducing Article 19.2 will also not save a law or a regulation. It would still have to stand the test of reasonableness, and it will also have to show that there were no other alternatives. So today, when you're talking about this particular issue, the first thing we have to keep in mind is we already have laws and regulations. Do we really need more? Is it not sufficient to just implement the laws as they are today? I feel that we just need better implementation today. We shouldn't be really craving for more laws at this juncture, especially not for something like this.
Fair enough. Mr. Narayanan, do weigh in on this on the back of this controversy, concerns being raised in Parliament over unregulated content, particularly the kind that targets politicians, because that's one point that is being made. Is this an attempt, you think, to shield political figures from scrutiny and using this episode as that?
Yeah,
Mr.
I
Narayanan,
think
for you.
Ms. Napin has said it very. Yeah, I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, we can.
Yeah. See, the constitutional position and legal positions are where they are, and it's been excellently explained by Ms. Napin right now. What is more critical for me is the social and political view we take of everything. You know, I think what we are seeing today in the case of Ranveer Allahbadia is a legal overreach of what is essentially an act of moral policing. Now, I would agree with this kind of moral policing because it is not, it is something, a rare case where the right wing and the liberals seem to agree that this man has crossed a red line. But this does not mean that the law goes after him.
Right.
Because this violates a red line that is social and moral in character,
Right.
not necessarily in a constitutional sense.
Yes.
And we also need to examine the context in which this is happening.
Yes.
See, please understand, there is a convicted rapist called Gurmeet Ram Rahim. He's been out on parole for half a dozen times while being convicted for a rape charge. There have been hate speeches recorded which are technically violations of the law, but there are people who are getting elected to public offices such as MP or MLA and being felicitated in the public.
Yes.
So we are living in this ironic age where one kind of morality is, even if it is falls short of legal yardsticks, overplayed and the law goes after them.
So we've seen these cases.
Even if there are...
You're right. We've seen these cases. Comedians, filmmakers, journalists, they face legal action for their
Absolutely.
work. Does it create an effect where content creators start censoring themselves out of fear as well? Do you think that is likely to happen as well?
Yeah, certainly. I think there is an atmosphere of intimidation and there are no-go areas because we have now not just public moral policing of a certain kind. There is a vigilantism, even on things like interfaith marriages, self-expression, following a certain kind of food habit. Everything is being policed with a sense of vigilantism. So, in
Right.
the social context, the socially perceived to be something immoral is being overloaded with certain, the law gives sufficient elbow room, perhaps not for the
And that,
judiciary, but certainly
yes,
for the police. So the police
yes.
goes after them. So there is a process, is the punishment kind of situation.
So
So
we
that is
have a
there,
system in
but
place. That's what
online.
Ms. Napinai, yes, that's what she started off by saying as well. And Ms. Napinai do weigh in because the Constitution, like you mentioned, guarantees freedom of speech under Article 19, but it also allows reasonable restrictions. At this point in time, do you need to see more elaboration of these reasonable restrictions? And like you mentioned, it's all seen and put down in our Constitution. Do you think there is a need for stronger laws like a Member of Parliament is suggesting? How important is it right now as we see the burst in social media?
Yeah. So when I was mentioning about laws existing, I wasn't just talking about the enumeration in the Constitution. You also have statutory laws which clearly set out what is obscenity and what is permissible or impermissible. You have general laws, the erstwhile Indian Penal Code, now replaced by the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, which also lays down what is obscenity and criminalizes obscenity. You have a very specific provision under the Information Technology Act, which again criminalizes publishing or transmission of obscene content. Now, the issue here is actually twofold. One is content that's being shared online or on platforms, chat apps, etc. And the second aspect, which seems to have come up today on the back of the earlier one, is the sharing in terms of OTT platforms. So when you look at content that's online, you have a lot of regulations, including what I just mentioned.
Yes.
Apart from this, you also have the intermediary guidelines, which also lays down you cannot share obscene content. The issue then becomes, do you really want a separate, more clear regulation or law that also regulates OTT on par with the movie industry?
Right.
Now, that's something INB has been evaluating. Until such time, they have been trying to fit in as much as is possible without the the stretching, literally breaking boundaries
Yes.
into the intermediary guidelines and
So
67.
that's what I'm saying, that by opening these doors about what is allowed, what is not allowed under freedom of speech, opens the doors to selective censorship. Don't you think that is dangerous?
Well, there are two ways of looking at it. One is for content creators also. Having clarity in terms of what is permissible may be a good thing because you don't want to be hit with a civil or a criminal prosecution later because somebody feels subjectively that what you shared is obscene. Certain things are obviously obscene, and today we have to remember that we are no longer in the Hicklin test age of Lady Chatterley's lover. Today, you have to meet what is the community standards of today when you want to target something as obscene.
Yes.
So, the way I look at it is law or regulations by themselves are not obstacles and they're not bad. In fact, they can be enablers, but it should be done with that idea that it's an enabler and not merely to restrict or restrain.
Yes. Mr. Narayanan, in many Western democracies, even highly controversial speech is protected unless it incites violence or there is direct harm. Here in India, the approach to free speech seems to be leaning more towards regulation. So I'm wondering whether this shift that we are asking for, at least from what we heard from the Member of Parliament today, is that shift that we are asking for more political, or do you think it's still legal? Mr.
I think
Narayanan.
there is a saying, yeah, there is a saying in management, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I'm using this management one-liner to illustrate how even democratic principles, exalted constitutional freedoms can be eaten by culture. Right now, we seem to be having a cultural situation where there is a tendency to over-regulate or over-police things based on cultural and political grounds, and and in spirit violates the constitutional provisions and the freedoms. And I think it is because, unlike Western democracies, ours, although we have been a historically an open society, in the past few decades, I would see has seen a steady growth of cultural pride,
Yes.
which kind of as assumed legal and political overtones,
Yes.
and that is a sort of a, makes me think individually that our constitution may be ahead of the times in terms of certain things,
Yes.
and there is a reversion to the mean, to use a statistical example. I think what we need now, let me be very constructive here. No, Ms. Napina spoke about the judicial limits and potential, but our structure of law enforcement, there is the police and there is the judiciary,
Yes.
and there is moral police. What, given the frequency and the extent and the gray areas involved in online content these days, we need something like an intermediate regulation, so like a tribunal or something, which can quickly pronounce on behalf of the judiciary something that, when handled by the executive, becomes political in character.
Is this because we're
Therefore,
getting too
we
many
need
of these
something.
cases? Why are you suggesting a tribunal? Why do you think our legal system is not able to handle it?
Absolutely, it is because you see how things are going. Somebody gets arrested, detained, FIRs are lodged, even charge sheets are sometimes not filed, and matter doesn't even go to the court, and yet there is a what I call the process is punishment
So you are suggesting a more structured
syndrome.
approach to be
In
able
fact,
to tackle
forget
such
about
cases.
stand-up comedians.
A more structured approach. You think that's
Exactly.
lacking? Ms.
So-
Napina, do you agree with that? Or do you
Now,
think
there
we
was-
need to kind of concentrate much more on self-censorship?
Well, self-censorship, or I would actually change it to say self-regulation, may be always the preferred alternative, but there is a practical difficulty to what is being suggested, because irrespective of whether you have a tribunal or not, it cannot replace the criminal justice system. You will still have to meet the whatever the criminal justice system throws at you, unless there is a procedure built in through a law regulation which mandates that a recommendation must come from that tribunal or a committee, whichever it may be, for a criminal prosecution to be initiated. That becomes then a layer of protection, which I think would be a welcome move. Why not let the industry
So
decide?
who requires
whether
that layer
something
of
is optimal or
protection?
not?
Ms. Napina, who requires that layer of protection in today's context?
I would think that the content creators and the persons who are disseminating this content require it. But I would actually flip it to say we as users also would welcome it. Because
We also need
we're
it.
not looking at censored
Do
content all the
politicians
time.
also require it, Ms. Napina? Because that's the ask. Because at least this member of parliament has referred to it, that it's important because these content creators are targeting them.
Why not? Why don't we extend it to them too? But let's keep in mind one thing. Section 66A of the IT Act was struck down because of its abuse, particularly in the political sense. So we have to remember that any time a particular vertical of people think that they need more protection than the others,
Exactly.
it's not going to work in a democracy. You stand on the same footing as I do, and within those parameters, if you're able to show that a particular content has impacted you adversely, go under all the existing laws that you have.
Yes.
The Supreme Court upheld the criminality of criminal defamation laws. It
Right.
did not strike it down. So you still have that option too. The difference is criminal defamation is a non-cognizable offense and you have to pursue it as an individual. You cannot use the police force for that.
Right.
That was the distinction that 66A brought.
Yes. So under law, everyone is equal, but as we know in life, some are more equal than others. At this point in time, this has been opened up again and again. It does come up as a debating point. It highlights a fundamental tension in our democracy between regulation and the right to free speech. And perhaps we'll see more of it as social media grows. There are concerns about misinformation, about offensive content. Perhaps they are valid. And the question, though, still remains. What is going to decide what is offensive and what isn't? A regulated digital space could curb harmful content, but it could also set a dangerous precedent for political censorship. And as lawmakers debate new restrictions, one thing seems to be amply clear, that any change to India's digital free speech laws is going to shape the future of our democracy. Will it be a future of openness or control? The answer, as always, lies in the balance. I want to thank my panelists for joining us with their perspectives on the show this evening. Thank you indeed for joining us on Business at 9. We'll take a very quick breather on the other side. We've got lots more to cover, especially how the advertising spends are panning out. That's something that's coming up in a moment. Don't go away. We'll be right back.